You're listening to Pre-Market Prep. I'm Brianna Valesky in for Joel Elconin. I'm joined by Angie Maguire. She's the Vice President of Grain for Citizens Elevator. Angie, thanks you for joining us on the show this morning. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we had some USDA data out earlier this week. Do you want to kind of help us digest it a little bit?
Yeah, we had some updated numbers come out earlier this week, and we saw the market basically take another leg up as a result. Most of what the trade got last week, we'd already had an idea or an understanding or an assumption of what the USDA was going to do after the June 30th acres and stocks report. That June 30th report had indicated we had less old crop supply on hand than what we had anticipated, and the USDA, of course, carried that through into their updated supply and demand numbers released last Friday. And basically what that does is just we've gone from this mindset of having too much and having burdensome stocks. We still have plentiful old crop supplies as we go into the end of the year, but now that we've run into some relatively significant production issues on the new crop side of things with too wet conditions plaguing much of the eastern corn belt, what happened last week with the tightening of old crop stocks just made new crop production that much more important, and of course gave us the ammo to rally and test another leg higher on the grain markets across the board pretty much.
So let's take a quick look at some of our individual grains. What's your overview for corn futures right now?
I think corn, right now, I think it's going to try to test, and I wouldn't be the least bit surprised on the December side of things to see it try to break that 450 high level that it hit. 453 was the high we saw, I believe, Monday night, overnight. That's the highest we've been since last June. Based on what I'm seeing out my window and on my travels, and I head out west to Iowa and back, we have a very wide range or very variable crop this year. The eastern belt's been excessively wet. Some areas have seen 200 to 300% of normal rainfall, whereas the western belt's been pretty good. So the questions and the unknowns, I think, are going to really keep the floor under the market, meaning that 430 range that we saw the market bottom out at yesterday morning is probably going to be on the low end of things, maybe 425, whereas the high end is really where we're still probing right now and testing, and it really depends on what we see. We have seen some heat come into the extended forecast for next week, this weekend and the next week, which is bad for pollination, which is the critical production phase for corn. So it is possible that we could see another leg up on this, and I think today we'll really test the guts or the strength of the buyers and the buy side, and see if they can avoid any sort of sell-off, once we hit the recent highs that we've seen put in place here Monday.
Billabong is in the chat. He's saying that his in-laws are farmers in Charlotte, I'm guessing North Carolina, and
Uh-huh.
saying a huge amount of rain this year has stunted
hmm
corn. What's the future look like for price?
Yeah, I think that's going to keep the floor in place. Yeah, we have seen
Okay.
a significant amount of rain, and I think that'll keep the floor in place. And like I said, I think there's a little bit more in the way of upside potential right now with the level of unknowns that we have around corn. See, wet weather is an unfamiliar sort of place for the market to deal with. That
hmm
traditionally rain makes grain, and that's what we heard all along May and June. But a farmer who looks out and sees his fields flooded realizes that rain does not necessarily make grain. But unfortunately with that, you can have really great looking crops, green, lush, beautiful looking, that don't necessarily put on the production potential that you would think they would, just because they're struggling with wet roots and less than ideal growing conditions.
Let's take a quick look at wheat as well. What's your outlook for wheat right now?
Wheat is a little different. We really have some weird things going on in wheat, just in the sense that we saw China, or the USDA at least, cut China's feed demand for wheat pretty substantially in last week's report. And that pushed global ending stocks up to the highest level that we've ever seen. I mean, they're record high level right now. The million-dollar question, of course, though, is when it comes to Chinese stocks and just general wheat stocks around the world. Wheat's a very difficult crop to store. It's very much, it's something that rodents love, bugs love. It's just not something that you can put in the bin like corn once it's cool and sweet, and basically not really pay much attention to it. Wheat is a very intensive crop to store, and so the question is do we have a lot of wheat that's less than food quality? I mean, are you and I going to want it in our bread, or are the citizens of another country going to want it in theirs? So, and then the secondary thing that we've seen is this growing season. When we got ready to harvest our wheat here in the U.S., the wet weather kicked in, and you can't harvest wheat, when it's raining, of course. So we have seen some damage to the crop take place in the field just because we haven't been able to get it out at the time we'd like to see it get it out. And so now the question, of course, is what happens if we have a lot of stocks of unusable wheat? What do we do? And at what point do we kind of address that fact and that potential? So there's still a lot of unknowns with wheat due to El Nino and things of that nature. But when it comes down to it, if you look at Chicago wheat, from a historical standpoint, anytime we break that $6 mark, it's only been a handful of years that we've really steadily traded well above that level. And those were freak occurrences when they did. So really, you kind of know that your upside of things is in that low 6 range, whereas the downside is around 5 or so. And wheat just is such it's just such a weird crop in the sense that there's so much wheat grown globally, but there's so many different kinds of wheat and the different levels of demand and supply in each sector. Give it an interesting twist and a fun twist anyway. We're just getting ready to harvest our crop up here, and I'm really not sure what to expect from a quality standpoint.
Angie, we've only got about a minute left with you, but can you give
Mm-hmm.
us your quick take on soybeans?
Yeah, soybeans are probably the crop I think, or have the biggest potential for an even more explosive rally, followed by an incredible demise. I mean, that's the hard part with soybeans right now. I think from a U.S. production standpoint, and with our old crop ending stocks, I think it's possible we could see new crop soybean ending stocks come in below 300 million bushel, which is relatively tight compared to the 500 million bushel that the USDA was anticipating. The $1 million question, of course, will be how does El Nino impact South American production if it does? If the Brazilian farmer goes out and plants wall-to-wall soybeans, of course, then we're going to see some really large global stock builds take place. We have the Argentinian election, and then we have, of course, the question surrounding what China is going to do. So soybeans are going to continue to be extraordinarily volatile. They're going to give great opportunities to both the up and the downside, and probably really put the emphasis on a yo-yo type market more so even than what you'll see corn and wheat do.
We've been on the line with Angie Maguire. She is the Vice President of Grain for Citizens Elevator. Angie, thank you so much for jumping on the show with us and giving us a quick outlook on the grains. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.